Hi, this is Mike from Mike's Unboxing Reviews and How To, and on today's video we'll be taking a look at the new GameMax Spark Cube Style Micro ATX PC case. Keep watching to find out more. Okay, so in today's video we're taking a look at the GameMax Spark Micro ATX case. This is a new design from GameMax and they've sent over to us free of charge for review purposes. They haven't asked us to say anything, and in fact they won't be seeing this video before it airs, so all you'll be hearing is basically my thoughts and findings on this case. It's been a long day today. I've actually spent most of the day on this, building, testing, doing airflow tests and all that kind of stuff, because I know exactly what you're going to be thinking out there. You're going to be thinking, Mike, it's got a solid front, it's not going to be able to breathe well. And this is a very common thing at the moment with GameMax cases. They seem to be either going all out mesh or all out solid front panels. And this is where this gets a little bit interesting, because this has actually got vertical airflow. Now, we often see vertical GPUs and things like that, but this has actually got vertical airflow. So what they've done is they've designed a case where, rather than having your traditional horizontal airflow, where it pulls in from the front and exhausts out the rear, this one takes in from the bottom and exhausts out the top. Now, obviously, heat being heat, it has a tendency to rise. So this is a naturally good way of getting rid of heat out of the case. There's also options in there to put a fan at the back as well. So if you want a little bit more help exhausting the air, then you certainly can do. Now, in today's testing and our build that we've done in this system, I've actually gone ahead and made it worst case scenario for this tiny little micro ATX box. We've got a Ryzen 9 3900X. We've only got 3 fans. 2 of those are attached to a radiator, and the other fan is actually on the power supply, which is kind of facing up and exhausting as well. So technically that works as a kind of front mounted exhaust. You'll get a better idea of it when we strip this thing down, which is exactly what we're going to do next. So let's start off with a quick tour of the case. Now, if you want a really more in-depth tour of the case, we did actually do a live stream where we featured this at the beginning of the stream. So that stream was something in the region of about an hour long. So if you want to check that out, links will be in the video description, so you certainly can take a look at that. We're going to have a quick breeze through here. We'll come back later and give you some ideas of temperature tests, and then you can work out whether or not this is going to be suitable for your next build. So starting off with the front panel, solid metal front panel there, and you've got a little bit of I/O going on at the front. So you've got a power button, which is illuminated, so there's a white LED, and that also incorporates a hard drive LED as well. So there's a little red LED that flashes when there's hard drive activity. Nice little feature, like that a lot. Underneath that, there is a combination audio jack, so that's headsets, microphones, all that kind of stuff. Sadly, no splitter included, so if you do want to separate your mic and your headset, then you will need to buy a separate splitter, but I think for most people it's going to be absolutely fine. Underneath that, we've got a USB Type-C connection, and underneath that, we've got a USB 3.0. So actually really good I/O. Normally at this point, we would spin the case around and take a look at the business side, but we're actually going to do the exact opposite. We're going to spin this around and have a look at the back, because the back is actually quite interesting. Normally with generally relatively budget cases, you normally just have a solid metal back panel, whereas this one actually has a glass one, as you can see, but it's got a smoke tint to it. You can't actually see through it at all, so it's almost like a black mirror effectively. I think it just adds a little bit of class. When we move around to the business side, we do have a tempered glass panel, so 4mm thick. It is held in place. There's a frame all around it, all that kind of usual stuff. And it's a relatively full-size affair with a little bit of a bezel around the outside edges to hide those greasy fingerprints. At the back of the case, you can see there is a cutout here for a 120mm fan. There's also your I/O in its usual place. Something which is slightly unusual is, you're probably thinking, well, Mike, where the heck is the power supply? Well, the power supply is actually at the front of the case. And there is a lead which trails around to the back, and you just plug in your PC kettle lead into here. Sadly, there isn't a power on-off switch next to this, so you do have to make sure when you do the build, turn your power supply on, otherwise it's not going to work. And if you're one of those people that actually likes to turn your PC off at night fully, you're going to have to do that at the wall socket, because otherwise you're going to have to take this top panel off every time you want to do that. 4 blanking plates at the bottom here for your PCI Express. This potentially could be an issue with some micro ATX motherboards, especially if your graphics card slot is a little bit lower down than usual. That is going to mean if you're using a 2 slot or 2.5, maybe even a 3 slot card, it's going to come down very low into the bottom of here. And being that there isn't any kind of basement as such, it is literally going to be almost touching the floor. But it isn't a problem, because we do have a fully ventilated deck area, which we'll take a look at shortly. So next up, we're going to take a look at the bottom. So on the bottom, we've got 4 feet, which are brushed steel or brushed aluminium, whatever you want to call it. And there's foam or rubberized pads on the bottom to get rid of noises, etc. And also we do have a pretty much full-length magnetic filter. So not a particularly elaborate affair, just one of those ones which you can just pull off, and there are some plastic washers in there as well, which are used for dampening for if you're installing a hard disk drive into this bottom section. This isn't the easiest of things to remove, but certainly when it's in place it is going to stay there because we do have these 4 magnets on there, which keeps it all nicely in place. And as you can see, with the mesh out of the way, you can see this is very open at the bottom here. So this is effectively your intake. Normally this would be at the front of the case, pulling in air and exhausting out the back. With this option, pulling in cold air at the bottom. And this actually does have a couple of other benefits as well. If you're one of the people that has actually owned a vertical airflow chassis, I've got a very similar setup in the PC behind me. So we've got 3 fans at the bottom and they're exhausting out through the top. Now the benefit of that is dust particles struggle to actually go down underneath the PC and then back up through. It's very, very good for limiting the amount of dust that gets actually inside your PC. Now clearly, if you've got this thing in some kind of workshop and there's lots and lots of dust in the environment, it's going to pick it up. But generally, in this particular room, we do a lot of things in here and we do get a lot of dust. We've got cats, kids, etc, etc. It's a dusty environment, but generally we find that this sort of design doesn't actually pick up hardly any dust at all. So now we can take a look at the top of the case. So this is your exhaust, a massive exhaust section, which I feel has been done particularly nicely. I really like this kind of design. Looks really cool from pretty much all angles. And in order to actually remove it, all it is 2 thumb screws on the back, which aren't captive, sadly. So potentially you may drop them and lose them, but it is what it is. And all you do is just pull the unit back and this whole section comes out. And there's that really nice nylon mesh in there to prevent dust or anything actually dropping into the case. With that removed, you can see we've got a 240mm radiator installed in here at the moment, and also you can see how the power supply configuration works. So ATX style power supply. If you want to make a little bit more room in there up front for cable management, you can potentially put in an SFX power supply with an adapter. You can do that very easily, and you can see there is the cable which runs from the back here, travels along there, spins around, goes into your power supply. Like I said, make sure you turn on your power supply, otherwise you'll regret it after you put the top back on. This works in 2 ways. Obviously, power supply being at the top is good because it uses exhaust flow, just an additional exhaust to get rid of heat, and also because it's at the top as well, it's going to let heat out very easily, and it works very well. I've got to be honest with you, I was thinking temps on this were going to be awful. I'm generally surprised, I really was, but we'll check those out a little bit later. So now let's take a look closer inside. So to take the glass panel off, there's normally 2 screws which reside at the top here. I've already taken those out just for ease of this video, and that is the panel removed. And as you can see, got some metal ridges on there to hold it all in place, so that's really nice, and it's got a very light smoke tint to it. So looking inside, if I tilt this down a bit, we'll give you some angles, I'll give you some B-roll shots of this as well, which I took a little bit earlier on. So 240mm radiator in the top. If you don't want to have a radiator in here, you want to go traditional air cooling, in the top section you can get 2 120mm fans or 2 140mm fans. A 280mm radiator potentially might work. I'm looking at the gaps here. It's going to be tight. It's a little bit tight with a 240 if I'm completely honest, so 280 is going to be even more of a struggle. But if you've got the patience and you're happy to do it, then I don't see any reason why it wouldn't fit, but just make sure that your cabling lines up with the back channels, which again should be relatively easy to do. As you can see, micro ATX motherboard in here. This particular one is the B450 ASRock Steel Legend. We've got a Ryzen 9 3900 in here, and actually it runs really well. I was expecting this to get very hot very quick, but actually the temperatures are pretty good, and the actual performance results were kind of pretty much exactly the same as what I see with my X570 setup. So yeah, I was quite surprised in that regard. You can also see in here, we've got our Zotac graphics card in here. So this is a RTX 2060 Super Mini. Fits in there absolutely fine. This is a kind of 2 and a bit card, and this particular motherboard, as you can see, the PCI Express slot is a little bit lower, so it is 1 slot lower than what it would normally be. So the graphics card is a little bit lower down. I would have liked it to have been 1 slot higher, and then I could have put in some fans at the bottom. That is going to be a trade-off for some motherboards. If the PCI Express slot is a little bit low, then you may need to forego putting additional fans in the bottom, of which you can put 3 in there. Potentially you could put a 360mm radiator in there. It's going to be hard work. I would probably avoid it, but 3 120mm fans works absolutely fine, or 2 140s if you wanted to, which actually might balance up nicely with having 2 in the top as well. When it comes to cable management and installing the power supply, you will need to do yourself a favour, and that is to remove this panel here. So this panel actually is a multi-purpose panel. It supports 2 SSDs or hard disk drives of a 2.5-inch size, and also it acts as somewhere to basically tuck all your cables behind, because there isn't really a great deal of space in here. This is a very small design. It's very compact, and considering how much is physically in here, it's actually really surprising. So taking out the 3 screws, you can now see we've got our power supply in here. So this is a full size, actually one of the larger ATX power supplies on the market. This is actually one of GameMax's RGB versions. I chose this actually because the RGB goes nicely with the RGB from the GameMax cooler, and basically the RGB in there just to brighten things up a little bit. Obviously, if you want to do a really nice stealthy build on this, you can do very easily. There's no reason why you shouldn't. It's just for kind of display purposes, it makes more sense for me. Now this is a modular power supply, and as you can see, I've only connected up the exact minimum of what I need here. So although saying that, there is actually an additional SATA connection, which I've tucked in there as well. So you can actually tuck in quite a lot of stuff in there. You could as well, if you want to, put some sort of RGB or fan controller underneath there. That panel actually does hide things quite nicely, and I don't think it looks too ugly. You may prefer it without it, I don't know. Let me know what you think in the comments section below. When it comes to cable management, there's quite a few cutouts and things. You're probably seeing some B-roll of this from when it was empty as well, so you can see exactly what was going on. Again, if you want to see it in more depth than the live stream we did where we covered it and went through lots of questions and answers, then you can definitely check that out. But I think that's pretty much it for inside. Plenty of room. Again, if you want to add more fans, you can add an additional fan on the back. You can have up to 6 fans in here. So 3 on the bottom, 120, 1 on the back, 120, and another 2 at the top, 120. So 6 120s. And kind of, I guess you're including this as an exhaust as well, depending on your power supply type. So yeah, there's a potential for an awful lot of airflow in this thing. So I'm going to spin this round and we'll take a look in the back. So again, same deal for this panel, 2 screws which go in the top. You don't have to put the screws in if you don't want to, but to keep it in place I would probably recommend it. And taking that off, then we can have a look inside at my terrible cable management. To be honest with you, there isn't a great deal you can do back here. It is quite narrow. At the deepest point here is just over 1 inch in depth, which runs along this top channel and down here. Against this side panel here, things do get a little bit tighter. There is enough room for me to just put these cables from all the RGB and the fan headers, etc., and just put that on there. The back panel still goes on very easily. It folds down. You could spend a little bit more time and effort on this cable management if you really wanted to. And again, there's still room, so you can, if you want, put another drive in there. That works out, so you can actually have 4 2.5-inch drives in here, which is, again, pretty crazy if you think about it. Potentially, you can have a 3.5-inch drive, although that needs to go in the bottom section, so that would be screwed into where those rubber mounts are at the bottom, so you can mount a 3.5-inch drive down there. You can still then have another 3 drives, so another 2.5-inch drive there, another 2 on the front, so that opens up a lot of possibilities. Even if you use this as some sort of media server, because it is quite small, you could have this next to 42, 55-inch TV, whatever, and have it as your home media center. There's no reason why not. It is certainly compact enough. So there you go, I've turned the PC back on now, and I should have actually changed the fan settings. They're actually in the test configuration at the moment, so now because I've got nothing plugged in, it's going to get very upset because there's no actual HDMI output going into anything. So yeah, we'll let that do what it's doing. Anyway, it's pretty quiet, I've got to be honest with you, considering how close I am to it. And there are, well, you've got the AIO pump, you've got the graphics card and everything. You can still get your hand underneath there, so if you wanted to put more fans in, you definitely could do, but realistically you don't need to. And I'm going to show you some slides now and go through some of the temperatures. So I did 3 main tests. They're quite limited in what we've actually done, but you'll get the general idea. There is an on-running theme, which you're going to get very, very early on in the slides, but we'll go through them anyway, because some of you are going to ask. So I did 3 tests. So one test is basically as it is now. So this is a open configuration. So no top panel, no side panel. Basically, it's an open chassis, effectively. Then I went ahead and did the completely closed chassis, so that is all the side panels on and the top panel on as it would be in the normal configuration. And then I thought, well, I'll try it just without this top panel installed to see if this is actually causing any restriction and preventing the hot air escaping. Now, just to reiterate, cooling wise, we've got the GameMax 240mm AIO in here. That is it. That is the only thing cooling this PC. There's no other fans other than there is a fan in the actual power supply, which most things have. So this is kind of worst case scenario. I could have probably gone with a single cooler in there. You can fit CPU air coolers up to 168mm. So there's actually quite a lot of depth there. So if you do want to put an air cooler in there, the world is your oyster. you could realistically get a D15 in there, Noctua, if you wanted to. Yeah, pretty much anything you want. Just ideally make sure that the airflow is going to be right in your case. Anyway, I'm digressing, so let's take a look at the results. So let's take a look first of all at some Cinebench stress tests. So this is obviously pretty straightforward and very easy to do. So with the open case, we scored 18,769 points. With the top panel off, we scored 18,659 points. And with the case completely closed, we scored 18,633 points. So in terms of actual performance-wise, yeah, having a completely open system is going to be beneficial to any PC, really. I don't think there's many which would argue against that, especially considering we've got no extra fans in here at all. So yeah, I think really kind of it's almost like a run-to-run variance, what we about 100 points out or so between it being fully closed and fully open. So yeah, that's absolutely fine to me. Next up, we'll take a look at CPU Z. Now this is a really basic thing. I just hit the benchmark. And we've done two versions, single core and also multi-core. So let's take a look at the single core first of all. So the single core, we've got with the open case, 550 points, 0.9. With the top panel off, we've got 545 points. And with the case completely closed, we've got 549 points, 0.2. So realistically, again, kind of run-to-run errors. If there's a background task or something, that could knock a couple of points off. But effectively, they've all scored arguably all the same. And to be honest with you, when it comes to the multi-core, things don't change a great deal either. With the case completely open, we get 8,284.8. With the top panel off, we get 8,260. And with the case completely closed, we get 8,245.2. So again, yeah, kind of, although the graph looks like it's a massive jump, realistically it's not. It would be the difference between maybe having Word or Paint or something like that open in the background. It's very, very minimal. So effectively, the actual airflow is not being an issue, it's not hindering, and actually it's doing particularly well for this particular processor in such a small case. So let's take a look at something a little bit different. So let's now concentrate on the GPU. Now the GPU obviously is not being cooled by anything at all. It's literally just pulling in cold air or kind of ambient temperature air from underneath the case through that mesh. So let's take a look at the results there. So with the case completely open, we've got a score of 5,954 points. With the top panel off and the side panel on, we've got 5,926 points. And with the case completely closed, we've got 5,888 points. So again, very, very minimal differences there. Maybe if there were some fans on the bottom, just pushing a little bit more air in there, things would be potentially better. To be honest with you, the temperatures were kind of almost identical all the way through. So I don't think that's much difference. It's literally just the rest of the system heating up and obviously having a little bit of an impact on all components as heat generally does. But again, the differences are minuscule. And to kind of summarize how that equates to actual raw FPS, let's take a look at the FPS figures. So with the open case, we get an average of 238.1. With just the top panel off, we've got 235.3. And with the case completely closed in its normal specification, we get 233.7 frames per second as an average. So that's kind of 5 frames difference, I think, between best and worst. And bearing in mind it's over 200 frames per second, so if you say it's kind of somewhere around 2, maybe 3% difference overall between being a completely open air bench and being in basically an enclosed glass case. I think that's done really, really well, considering there are, like I said, I keep on saying it, there are no additional fans in this, literally. We have got 2 fans on the AIO. We have got nothing at the bottom whatsoever trying to cool this poor 2060 Super, and we've only got our exhaust fan from the PSU, which generally in most cases is actually completely ignored because it's normally face down in a basement section, isolated from the rest of the system. So I kind of like the way this works. In terms of potentially saving yourself money, because you don't need to buy a load of extra fans, you can kind of just work with it as it is. It does seem to work well. The vertical airflow, obviously, if you've ever done anything, maybe you've worked in a loft, which I've done recently, you open up a loft hatch, what's the first thing that happens? You just feel this hot air coming up past you because hot air always wants to escape. So as long as there aren't any crazy obstructions on the top of this case, or on the bottom for that matter, then naturally convection is going to take hold and it is going to basically clear the heat out itself without the need for fans. But obviously depending on the heat load you're putting inside it, then you might want to think about that. But anyway, I think that's going to be pretty much it. I'm in two minds about this case. Now the reason why I'm in two minds is because there is actually an ATX version of this in the pipeline. So this is, like I said, micro ATX version, the Spark micro ATX. There is actually an ATX version which may or may not come over to the UK. Kind of excited to see if that turns out, because if it does, that will be a little bit of a game changer, because we'll have a little bit more room at the bottom. Effectively, it's exactly the same design, it's just stretched higher, so you've got those extra PCI Express slots, so you can fit in some extra fans and got a little bit more working room in there, which would definitely be nice, but not entirely necessary. As you can see, you can hide everything behind that panel, which hides in there. I'm still not entirely sure whether it should be with the panel or without. Let me know what you think in the comments section. But overall, yeah, I think it looks great. It's a little bit different. It's actually quite nice to work in once you kind of work out how you're going about things. I would definitely say if you are going to be buying one of these, do consider your motherboard choice. If you do have a thing where you want to put some fans at the bottom, make sure your PCI Express slot is as high as it possibly can be for a micro ATX. Otherwise, potentially, you may find your graphics card kind of squashed right up against the fans, which isn't a problem, but it's just not ideal. It's nice to have a little bit of a gap between them to avoid any turbulence. But something I have not mentioned yet is going to be the price. Now, pricing is always a weird thing. At the moment here in the UK, you can pick this up for somewhere in the region of about £60 from your usual suspects like CCL, eBuyer, etc, etc. We'll put some links for those in the video description. If you want to find out more as well, I'll put some links to the actual GameMax UK website so you can check out all the specs, facts and figures there. If you want to go a little bit sort of left of field, then potentially you can pick this up for about £33 at the moment. But you may need to wait a long time for it, and you do have to pay a significant amount of postage from China from our friends over at AliExpress. In fact, GameMax have got their own store on AliExpress, but that is a different GameMax, but it's the same GameMax. It's difficult to explain. Anyway, I'll put all the links for it in the video description so you can check out for yourselves. There's also actually 3 colours as well. So there is the black version, which is what we've got here. There's also like a gunmetal grey or silver, and also there's a white version as well, if that floats your boat. So yeah, lots of options, and hopefully we might see the ATX version as well pretty soon. So let us know what you think in the comments section. Also, if you haven't been here before, hit the subscribe button and the chime notification to be notified of future video releases. But for now, I've been Mike. This is Mike's Unboxing Reviews and How To, and hopefully we'll catch you in the very next video. Thanks for watching.